everyone. How are you today? I'm Elizabeth Corey, and I'm the founder of beatingtrauma.com. And we are here today to discuss trauma and the impact on us. And just to let you know, today I'm going to be talking about the question, why me? It's something I've heard a lot in my own inner dialogue, and I've heard a lot from my clients over the years. And so I thought I would kind of take a little bit of time and really evaluate it, break it down, look at what's going on there when we ask ourselves that question, and maybe give some alternative answers to the question that are quite different from the ones that we've probably been told for a very, very long time. So hopefully you can join me for that. I'd love to hear your input on what I have to discuss with you. Of course, I have notes as I always do, but I really want to hear what you guys have to say about this. I think it's normal and common for us to contemplate this question. It's an important part of our healing journey to really move through all of the different potential interpretations of this question. And so I want to spend some time on it. What does it mean when we ask, why me? What's going on there? And believe me, there's a lot going on there. So, as I mentioned already, we've all probably asked this question, why me? We've probably asked it many times. It is almost a guarantee that we are going to spend some time contemplating this question. And, it's understandable. It's understandable. I mean, a lot of times when we're faced with toxic positivity, we might feel like it's ungrounded to ask this question, or we can't ask this question, or we're not allowed to ask this question. Yeah, none of that is true. We are allowed to ask whatever it is that is showing up for us. Okay, so I want to be really clear about that. But I also want to say that oftentimes we've been set up to ask this question, and we've also been set up to have answers to this question that are not good for us, that are not good for our healing journey. So I want to talk about that setup before we talk about other ways we can really look at this question. The setup began a very long time ago, basically when humans existed on the planet for the first time. And the question, the lies we were told back then had a lot to do with how we created this system, so to speak, where some people were elevated over others. Okay. So the big thing that came out when humans first became a part of this planet was that the people who elevated themselves, right? The rich, the wealthy, the powerful, people who called themselves royalty, right? Whatever it was, tried to elevate their status to other people based on lies that were answers to this particular question of why me. Okay, so what might some of those answers to that question look like? If you are a good person, good things happen to you, right? Like for the beginning of time, we've been hearing people say, I am rich, or I am wealthy, or I am in this position because I am somehow better than others, right? So this is a mentality that it was at the time and still is today, really important for people who were in sort of an elevated status, for them to kind of get this point across. They really, really wanted people who they had elevated themselves above to feel like they were better, right? So this was an important lie they needed to tell. So if you're a good person, good things happen to you, right? Another big one is if you are rich, it is because you are better than others. So similar to the first one, a little bit different, but these are the kind of things we're going to hear, different nuanced versions of this. If bad things happen to you, you have bad karma. And this can be kind of continued to be evaluated. Like, for example, if you believe in reincarnation or whatever, you could say, oh, you've done bad things in past lives, right? That kind of thing. Like that idea of you have bad karma, you vibe low, like whatever words you want to use for it. It's like bad things happen to you because of these reasons. Like these were a lot of the lies that have been told for generations. Again, since humans first started existing and the first humans started to elevate themselves above other humans, they use this concept of you're at a lower status because you're less than, right? Like, I mean, it's pretty much ingrained in our society, even today, to really focus heavily on this idea of where you are on that status totem pole, right? Is because of like just how good you are as a person, right? Like that's the message that we often hear. Now, these days, there's a lot of pushback on that message, right? There's a lot of people coming out and going, that's a bunch of crap, right? And it's a good thing, but sometimes the pushback is also ungrounded because the pushback can come in this form of, if you're not constantly attempting to be extremely charitable and sacrificing yourself for others, then you're also not good. It's like yes, we're moving away from this idea that just because you're rich, you're better than us. But now we have to be really good. Like we have to figure out what good is, and we have to behave in that very good way, which is also kind of swings us too much in the other direction. So while it is sort of pushing against that mentality that the rich and the powerful are better than others by saying, no, it is the charitable and the saintly that are better than others. It's still putting a lot of pressure on people to do certain things and behave in certain ways, actually then make you okay. Right? So all these messages are dangerous in that way because it's still not focusing on the inherent value of the individual, which is where I want to go with this, right? Obviously. You probably already knew that if you know me. I want to go there, right? But the other side of this is not a societal side, but it's more of in abusive families. So families where there's a lot of trauma going on. We may have also heard other lies, maybe even more specifically targeted towards us, that are also a part of the problem when asking the question, why me? It might have been things like, these bad things are happening to you because you did horrible things. Again, we're getting into that idea of like, you did them in past lives, or your soul is broken, or your soul is dented, who knows, whatever kind of things they might say. You were born into this, again, you've done horrible things. You are inherently bad, right? And that's why these things are happening to you. So this is how people who are very abusive and do bad things to children have a way of just kind of turning it around on the child and saying, well, I'm only doing this because something's wrong with you, right? Like, I'm not doing this. It's not my fault I'm doing this, right? It's your fault I'm doing this. And it's because there is something inherently wrong with you. Right. Another example of this would be that, you can never be better than us. Like all of us born into this family, we are all the same and we all struggle and we're all like, you're the same as us, so you can never be better than us. Right. So there's also that mentality that comes out as well. Right. So there's a lot of different ways in which we've heard the message that something's wrong with us. And so then when we start asking questions like, why me? We often will get sort of this unconscious barrage in our system from all the parts who have heard all of these lies and they think they have the answer. And unfortunately, this can keep us really stuck, right? It can keep us kind of stuck in all of these shaming lies, which, by the way, shame is a very important emotion we are trying to heal in our system, okay? But shame is the only emotion that is 100% based on lies, okay? Shame is never the truth. With other emotions, more than likely there was some aspect of truth associated with them at the time, right? So, for example, they are often flashbacks, but shame was never the truth. You were never a bad person. These things are completely inaccurate, but they're stuck in our system. They're stuck in there, right? And unfortunately, they're having a significant impact on the way we are, at the very least, unconsciously answering the question, why me, right? So these lies are sitting in there going, oh, well, it's obvious why you, because you're bad. It's obvious why you, because you're. you've done bad things and you're not good and your past lives are horrible and this is your karma. And I mean, all of this sort of unconscious cycling around is what we often do to the question, why me? So what I want to do is next, I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about what we do with that. And then I want to talk about maybe some other ways we could start interpreting it slightly differently, right? So many times when we are asking ourselves, why me, we will try to find that intellectual answer. Now, most of the time when we're trying to find an intellectual answer, we are operating from a part I refer to as the controller. The controller, or the ego self, right, is trying to keep everything up here in the mind. They're trying to keep everything up here where we can figure it out, right? So figuring it out is a big part of what the controller does. Staying in the mind is a big part of what the controller does. So we will read all the books, right? We will read all the books. We will search all the spiritual teachings. We will maybe even study it, go and get a degree in something that has some with this idea of we will seek and search for the answers so that we can process this idea in the mind, right? And we'll spend a lot of time on that. I like to call these sort of mind spins, as they're sometimes referred to. I like to call those, the spin cycles, but they're really meant to keep us distracted, right? Whether you refer to them as rabbit holes or spin cycles or whatever word you want to use for them, they're really meant to keep us in the mind. And the truth is that we're not going to come up with any kind of answer we can absolutely wholeheartedly believe while we're in human form. To be totally honest with you, there really is no way we can know for sure. But that controller will search and search and search and search for an answer. The problem is underneath all that searching is that unconscious telling us, oh, this happened because you're bad. This happened because you're not a good person. That's what you've been told. And so that is still sitting in the unconscious, really, unfortunately, wreaking havoc on the life you want to have. And so we want to start to look at this differently, right? We want to start to figure out what are some other interpretations we can have of this concept of why me? What's another way that we can break down the answer to this question? Because the truth is, oftentimes, why me becomes something that is a bit of an intellectual distraction, or why me becomes something that really draws out that shame and futility of those unconscious parts who were told all of these lies originally. And so it doesn't really get us very far, right? As you probably recognize in your own journey, the why me, it doesn't really take you anywhere significant. And that is just the truth of the question. That said, we don't need to judge the fact that the question is there. Of course it's there. It only makes sense that it's there. I mean, why wouldn't humans ask that question, right? And Carol is saying, I ask that question every time I get off social media scrolling. So one of the biggest times we ask why me is exactly what Carol is talking about. It is when we see other people's lives and we compare ourselves to their lives. And then we're like, right, my life. And one thing we're doing there, of course, is we're comparing our inner world and the way that we're feeling largely to the external world that exists only on social media for other people, right? I mean, we know what we're doing. I could talk all day about how social media fuels how bad we feel about ourselves. But it is one of the times when we start asking the question is when we start comparing. And that is a controller thing as well. Comparisons are driven by the ego self, by the controller saying, my life needs to look like their lives. Why can't I get my life to look like their lives? Why me? I shouldn't be in this situation. It's not fair. All of that stuff. By the way, all of that stuff, fantastic writing prompts. If you've been with me for a while, you know how I talk about writing, and those are all really great things to write from, truly. And they are going to be coming from that controller. But let's talk about some other ways to break this down. And actually, this first way to kind of answer the why me question is something that showed up for me this past weekend. It sort of stemmed from a conversation with a client. And it really kind of grew on me. You know, when those things that just like won't leave you alone. This is one of those things for me. It just would not leave me alone. And I started looking at this and it's like, okay, what are the things that really pushed me to heal myself, right? Well, I'll be honest, a lot of the times those were the very things that were the most painful. And by the way, that's quite common. Like I don't have a unique story in that way. The things that happened in my life that were particularly painful were the things that pushed me towards growth. Right. And so I started to look at it and say, okay, what if these really painful things, and in particular in this situation, I'm talking about adulthood, like the catalysts to our, recovery journey, to our healing. What was that happened? Those things are often the things that bring out that why me question. But then I started to go, what if those things are actually an invitation to be abnormal? Now, the term abnormal is used in all the wrong ways in society in general. So you may even hear that word and go, good grief, I don't want to be that. Because a normal is what all of our controllers are striving for. And by the way, normal is always shifting and changing and the goalposts are always moving because normal is basically a controller thing. Like there's no normal, right? You hear normal is the setting on the dryer. That is correct. That's as far as it should go. But oftentimes, if we can look at this and say, what is abnormal? What does it mean to not be normal? And I'll be honest, most of the time, it's a much healthier way of living. But sometimes I feel like the things that happen to us in our adult life that take us off the hamster wheel, that take us out of normal, are doing that because we are actually meant to get off the hamster wheel. We're not meant to be driving in that same way that the normal people are driving. There's actually a different way for us to live on the planet. And these things that seem to incessantly go wrong for us when we try to jump back on the hamster wheel are the universe saying to us, stop being normal, right? Because normal isn't necessarily good for us, right? So I think sometimes when these things happen to us, especially in our adult lives, once we have the power to make choices around how we live on the planet. So that's not when we're children. It is often an invitation to be abnormal. Step off the hamster wheel and say, you know what? The capacity for me to keep putting on this mask and comparing myself and doing what the Joneses do and, posting all the amazing stuff on social media, that capacity is not there for me right now. And maybe that's because I'm not supposed to do that, right? I'm not supposed to live that way. I am supposed to be abnormal. Now, you will hear a ton of resistance in your system to what I just said, and most of that's going to come from your controller or that ego self that says, I must look like everyone else, do what everybody else is doing, meet the standards, whatever those standards are. Again, they're changing all the time. And that idea of being abnormal, and of course you don't have to use that word to describe yourself. That's just for my purposes today, is to kind of drive this message home using that word. But you can use a whole lot of other words that maybe are more pleasant for you to hear on a daily basis. But honestly, I really see that a life that doesn't subscribe to normal as potentially being a much more successful, peaceful, purposeful life on this planet. But yeah, it won't necessarily look good on social media, right? Like that kind of life that I'm talking about doesn't necessarily do that. But why, the answer to why me may be the universe doesn't want you going in that direction. That's not what you're here for, right? And that can be hard to take in, especially when we are holding on for dear life to whatever it is that is falling away. That's a tough message. And it usually does require grief on our part. It requires us to let go. It requires us to feel something. Again, exactly what the controller is trying to avoid, right? Generally speaking. So that's my first interpretation. That's just the first one. May go a little over time. We'll see how we do. Jan is saying such an interesting topic. Had rough 2023 health-wise, was blaming a probable karmic debt. There it is. When I sat quietly with this, self-sabotage emerged as a big part of my issues. This is so enlightening. Yes, whenever we can hear the message, karmic debt, we are connecting to a karma kid. And you just gave the perfect example of why I gave that part that name. Yes, that's a good, and I like to say that I named the karma kid, not because I believe in karma necessarily, but because the karma kid believes in karma. And what I was describing for you today at the beginning of this session was exactly why the karma kid believes in karma, because they've been told, maybe not using the word karma, maybe using it, but they've been told that these things are happening to them for a reason, and it's because they're bad. So when you hear that karmic debt stuff come up, that's your cue to write from that message. That message is one that has a tendency to really get in the way of the life we ultimately want, and certainly of our peace. So kudos to you for hearing the message, because it's often underneath that controller who's screaming pretty loud. But at the same time, working with that message, it's so, so important for your healing and really moving past that and in your life and in a way that's really helpful. So thank you for that, Jan. The next one I want to talk about, as far as these are, by the way, interpretations, answers to the question, why me, that are healthier interpretations than the ones we may have heard our whole lives. The next answer that I want to consider, and you could also pose these as what if. So what if you are here to make a big change by plowing through some significant fear? Okay. Now, I am not here to elevate anyone, because we already see what happens when we elevate. This is what we talked about at the beginning with the rich, the powerful, the royal, the wealthy, the whoever. They elevated themselves. So we're not trying to necessarily elevate you in this scenario, but we are saying, hey, maybe I got a big task. And maybe that's because of who you are, your strength, your power, your ability to overcome. I don't know. But maybe that is a big task you got. And maybe it isn't so much about you being bad, but it's more about you being like someone that others can put their faith in, that others can rely on to kind of buck the system a little bit, right? To plow through some significant fear and do something a bit different, getting back to that abnormal word, right? Do something a little different than what is often done with our fear. What is often done with our fear? Oh, you name it. Like, hoarding money. That's what rich people do. That is their fear coming out. There are a million different ways that we act on our fear that is unhealthy. Most of the unhealthy behaviors are based in fear. Addictions, all of it is based in fear. But what if we can plow through that fear and do something different on the other side of it, right? That's a message I like to think about. Why me is the universe kind of saying, hey, this fear that you're currently feeling, work through that, work with that, push out the other side of it. Do the thing that you want to do, that you stop yourself because of the fear. Do that thing, right? I hear this message a lot in my own system. The fear of visibility has really held me back in this work that I'm doing here. Not enough. Obviously, I'm still here. I'm still pushing. But in some ways it has. And it feels like this is a really big message for me, right? So I really like to interpret it in that way when I can. And the last interpretation I'll give you today also can definitely be put in a what if question form, is that what if you are not as alone as you think? Okay. What I mean by that is I do believe trauma is everywhere. I do believe that almost all of us are impacted by trauma. It may be a series of micro traumas, okay? It may be one big macro trauma, or it may be a series of macro traumas, which was certainly my experience and is the experience of many people who come to me. But this idea that I have trauma and others don't is something I don't think serves us, if I'm honest. As a matter of fact, if we're in a relationship, it can get us in trouble because oftentimes what I find is people who are willing to admit their trauma are in relationship with people who are not willing to admit their trauma. And so what happens is that every major problem in the relationship is blamed on the trauma of the person who's talking about their trauma, despite the fact that both of you have trauma. So I want to throw that out there because that is really one of my least favorite things that I run into as far as scenarios are concerned. So keep that in mind. If you're open about your trauma, it doesn't mean your partner has their trauma. It means your partner is in denial about their trauma. Okay, so, and no, there are no exceptions to that. If you have trauma, you did not marry someone without trauma. Like, I'm just not even going to consider that possibility. Call me rigid, but that's how it works. I'll get off that soapbox now. But I guess what I'm saying is you're not alone in your trauma. Everybody's got trauma. We're all dealing with trauma. It shows up in different ways and it affects us with different defense mechanisms. But for some reason, your higher self is saying, oh no, we're not living in denial. We're not vibing low. We are pushing through this and out the other side. I don't know why. Again, why me? We could ask our higher selves, why me? Like, why have I got to do this? And we can ask the question. We need to write from the question. But in the end, we also need to look at it and go, my higher self is on a mission and they want me to be aware. They want me to vibe higher. They want me to process this trauma. Why? Hindsight is 2020. We may not know yet. I mean, I've certainly figured out a lot of the reasons, but I'm not going to kid myself and believe that I figured them all out. But I will say that the higher self is pushing you, and they're pushing you in a way that other people's higher selves are not pushing them for whatever reason. We will not know that while we are here. Okay. But keep letting yourself move towards that awareness, towards that healing, and towards that truth telling, because we're just not all meant to sit in our denial for the rest of our lives. We're not meant to vibe at that level. That's not where we belong. We are pushing up. Okay. Why? I can't tell you, but I'm sure it's something really cool. That I can tell you. I'm sure it's something really cool. I very much believe that. And it's probably cooler than you even think it is gonna be, because oftentimes I've had my mind on something and then the universe has turned me this way and the new something is actually even better. So this is what I have for you today. Really take in this idea that the why me question is not about karma and it's not about some inherent badness of you, but there is a bigger answer to the why me that's important, right? It's really important. And keep kind of letting yourself like ask those deeper questions, right? And I hear you, Carol, when you say it takes a lot of trust to keep pushing through. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. And sometimes you'll push through and sometimes you'll stop. And sometimes you push through and sometimes you'll stop. And that's okay too. Keep writing, keep processing those emotions and keep bringing awareness to your trauma. It will change things for you. We'll continue to do that for you. So thank you all. And I will talk to you next Tuesday, same time, same place. I'll see you all then.